Hello guys and welcome back to another video. We're going to be going through a full summary of language paper 1. If you watch this whole video, I promise you'll be absolutely sorted for language. So the first one we look at is question 2. So question 2 is the language question for 8 marks. The question will always ask something like, how does the writer use language to describe X? So this is just a language focused question, as in we're only picking out language techniques. Now, if the timings is 10 minutes for the normal paper, if you've got extra timing, it's about 13 minutes. Now, we're going to go through a few different techniques that are really easy to spot, because remember, we're only focusing on language techniques. First one is a metaphor. So a metaphor is saying something is something else, like time is a thief. So, for example, time can't actually be a thief. It can't steal stuff, but that is a metaphor for saying it is a thief. A simile is saying something is like or as something. So, for example, fast as lightning. So you're comparing it and saying it's similar to the thing. So, for example, fast as lightning, you're comparing it to lightning. So you're showing there's similarities to that. And then personification is giving something human qualities, like the wind whispered. That is obviously, the wind can't whisper, that's a human trait. We are personifying it. So in terms of metaphor, if you're picking out a metaphor, think about how it's saying it is something else. So perhaps it has so many similarities, it's basically the same thing. So for example, with time as a thief, the fact that it's a metaphor, not a simile, because a simile is saying it's like it, it's showing that they're indistinguishable, because time really does take so much, it's like a thief. Whereas a simile is showing more of a likeness, so that the reader can have an understanding and a comparison. And then personification can show something is really powerful, it's almost alive. So the fact that the wind whispered, depending on the context in which that's shown, it really illustrates that something is alive, it's powerful, it almost seems like a real person. So the structure to follow for this question is PETA, ETA, Z. Now that stands for point, evidence, technique, analysis, evidence, technique, analysis, zoom. So what we want to do in this, we want to do 2 PETA, ETA, Z paragraphs. And what this will do is we're going to be focusing on different points about the question. So for example, if the question was, how does the writer use language to describe the car? Our first point is we think about, okay, how does it describe the car? Is the car quick? Is it old? Is it damaged? Whatever your point is, then you're going to provide me 2 bits of evidence and 2 techniques for the quotes to support your point. So think about, you want to have a point for each paragraph, both of your PETA, ETAs, paragraphs, so you can stay laser focused on that. And in terms of with all of these structures, the most important thing you can do for language is have structures for every single question that have got sentence starters and model examples. So on the Light Up Hub, we actually do you for every single question. We've created it with examiners, the correct structure, sentence starters, model examples. So all you've got to do is remember those and learn how to adapt it in the exam. And I promise you, that will be the difference between like a grade 4 and a grade 9. And especially for creative writing, the most important thing for language paper 1, let me just show you here, is understanding how to write it up, how to pre-write out your creative writing, and then how to adapt it to anything that you get given. And honestly, if you don't believe me, our students every single year go up like 3, 4, 5 grades by just doing this for English language. It is the most important thing you could do. So the first mistake you want to avoid in question 2 is listing techniques without analysing their effect. Now this is done the most for this question, not really for any questions for English. It's just, we call it technique spotting. So what a low-level student would do, or a low-level example, it'd be like the writer uses simile and some alliteration. This makes it more interesting. That is just technique spotting. That is just pulling out techniques, but you're not telling me the effect of them. And then you're thinking, okay, how do I do that? What you want to do is you want to get 1 to 2 well-chosen techniques, and you want to zoom on keywords and explain what the technique shows, how it works, and why it's effective. So in a high-level example, the simile pounds like tigers suggests the stories were wild and full of energy, reflecting how thrilling Mr. Fisher found them. So you can see there, I've said what the simile does. It says that the stories were wild and full of energy, because of course pounce like tigers are full of energy, so I'm saying the stories are like that. And then I've explained it, reflecting how thrilling Mr. Fisher found them. So I've not just stated the techniques, I've actually explained the effect of them. If it compared it to something like, as sad as rain. Obviously, that's a rubbish example, but to give you an example of it, as sad as rain, what does that do? It shows potentially like she is. Okay, let's look at a high-level example. So the simile pounce like tigers suggests the stories were wild and full of energy, reflecting how thrilling Mr. Fisher found them. So you can see there, what I've actually done is I've linked it to how the stories were wild and full of energy, because that is the effect of the simile. I'm saying because the simile says pounce like tigers, and tigers obviously full of energy, and it says the word pounce, then I've explained how the stories were wild and full of energy. Then I've given my explanation. Then I've even extended it to how that links to the character. So you can see I haven't just spotted the technique, I've said how it links and how it adds to my understanding that they were wild and full of energy, and then linked it back to the character. Now, question 3. This is again 8 marks. So question 2 is 8 marks. This is 8 marks. And this question will always be the same. It is, how is the text structured to interest you as a reader? Always the same question. It doesn't matter what the extract is on, it's always the same question. And again, the timing for this is 10 minutes for normal paper, about 13 minutes for extra timing. And what you want to do is you want to have different techniques for structure now. Not language. So the question before question 2 is just language. This is structure. So what we want to do is we want to look at some different techniques like zooming in. We want to look at the shifts in focus where the writer goes from a big picture to small detail. For example, they could be describing the whole setting and then they zoom in on something specific. They could be describing the whole ocean and then they zoom in on a fish jumping out of the ocean. That would be an example of a shift in focus, or the writer using zooming in, and that is a structural technique, because it's not just about the writing, it's how they've structured the writing so your focus shifts from one thing to another. Another technique we can look at for question 3 is cyclical structure. So it means the ending mirrors the beginning. So if you have a look at the ending and it has similar wording or very similar wording to the beginning, that is a cyclical structure because it starts how it ends. For example, for anyone who studies an inspector calls, it begins how it ends. The inspector becomes at the beginning and another inspector arrives at the end. That is a cyclical structure because it begins how it ends. And then lastly, a shift in perspective or time from past to present or different viewpoints. So we can actually see this is another technique that you can look at for structure techniques, is how they've shifted in perspective. When I say shift in perspective, does it come from the same character's perspective the whole time? Is it character A starts speaking and we also get it from character B's point of view, their POV, their perspective? Do we get different perspectives, different people's opinions on what's going on? And then also shift in time. Do we have flashbacks? Do we get to see people's past, present and future? Then we can have a look at these shift in perspective of time. So the first one is almost like the shift in focus. How does it focus on big picture then small picture, cyclical structure, beginning how it ends, and then shift in perspective or time. Now, the number one mistake that students make is they'll be saying like the beginning, middle, end without explaining the effect. So this goes for basically any technique, is they'll give the technique, they'll say, oh, the beginning starts like this, but the middle goes like this, or they'll say about a shift in focus. The writer focuses on the ocean, then they focus on the fish, but they won't explain the effect. For example, the text starts with description, then something happens, then it ends with a description again. That is a low-level example. Whereas what we want to do is we want to explain why the structure shifts, ask why here, why now, and link it to what the reader feels or understands. Now, this is the most important thing for structure when we're commenting on it. All I want you to think about is, why is it here? Why is it now? Why have they put the description there? Why have they put the speech there? Why have they put a short sentence there? Why there? Why not at the end? Why not at the beginning? Why right in that moment? And that will force you to explain the effect a lot better. Then all you've got to do is think about why here, why now, and what impact does that have on the reader? So for example, the extract opens with a peaceful lake scene but shifts to rising panic in the middle. So that you can see that I've not just said it starts with a description and then something happens. I've actually explained it starts with a peaceful lake scene but shifts to rising panic in the middle. And then this is my why here, why now, mirroring the character's fear and building suspense. That's why it's there, because it mirrors the character's fear at that point and it builds more suspense later on. And that is my why here, why now, because obviously if it didn't start with a peaceful lake and it ended with a peaceful lake, it wouldn't be able to build tension from the beginning. And that is what we want to really explain. Now, question 4, this is the evaluation question, and a lot of students do struggle with this question, so let's buckle in with this one. So it will always be a question that asks you, to what extent do you agree with the student's opinion about the second half? Now, when I say the second half, it will always give you lines for this extract. It will say from line 20 onwards, for example. Double check that in the exam. Make sure you do a little line, get a little highlighter, and that you highlight from that point onwards so you can just have a look, because you don't want to use quotes from before the extract they've stated, because you actually won't get marked for that. So the timing for this is about 20 to 25 minutes. If you've got extra time, it could be more like 27, 30 minutes. And then let's look at some things that we can do. Now, for this question, I want a lot of tentative language, which sounds fancy, but it's basically just saying that you are saying this may suggest, this could imply. Now, when I've spoken to examiners, and I've spoken to quite a few examiners, especially English language examiners, they actually will award you more marks for using tentative language, saying this could suggest this, but this also might suggest this, because it shows you're considering alternative interpretations, which basically means that you're saying, oh, it could show this thing, but it might also suggest this, which is great for English language because you don't actually know what the writer's intention is because you don't know who the writer is. So by using tentative language, it actually allows you to give more interpretations, as long as they're not too far away from the truth, right? As long as you're not making up things. It allows you to give different interpretations just by saying, oh, this could suggest this, but it might also suggest that. Really easy way to do it. Now, this is one of the most important things you want to do for question 4. It is evaluative language. Now, because we are saying how far you agree, you basically want to agree mostly with this statement. Now, you can disagree with it partly, and I would recommend just doing like a little bit of a disagreement, but you can still get full marks from fully agreeing with this statement. It's set up in a way for you to agree with it. They won't give you a statement that's not true, so do agree with it, then you can say, however, it could be interpreted that the writer unsuccessfully does this, or although the writer doesn't clearly show this, they successfully do this. That is the kind of thing we want to comment on. How successful are they in showing that statement? Think about you being like a detective and you're looking for clues. You're trying to see like, how well did they actually do this? Just like if, say, for example, somebody did somebody's hair and someone said, okay, how well does their hair look? Or how good's their haircut? And you go, oh, okay, I think that bit was successful. They've coloured the hair well. They've chopped it. It's a little bit wonky when they've cut their hair. Whatever it is, right? Hopefully you don't get a wonky haircut, but you get the idea. You'd evaluate it and you'd be like, oh, okay, this bit's good, but this bit isn't. So you can do that with the statement. It's like, get the statement, agree with it mostly, agree that the haircut's good, we don't want to upset the hairdresser, and then slightly disagree with it, and then go, okay, however, it could be interpreted, the cut's a bit wonky, or that colour doesn't really blend very nicely, or whatever it is. That is what you would do with the statement. So the thing to avoid is making vague or fixed claims without explanation. And what this means is it would be something like the writer definitely shows the character is evil. So you can see this goes against our tentative language suggestion because it's saying like definitely shows the character is evil without us actually knowing for definite, and it hasn't even explained it. If you're going to say something's definite, you better tell me why. But I would avoid saying anything's definite anyway. But if you're going to be that sure, give me a reason, right? So what we want to do is we want to use the tentative language and explain how the method shapes the reader's impression. So think about what it might, perhaps, could show, and how that overall links to the reader. So a high-level example would be, the repeated phrase, her cold smile, could suggest cruelty, but may also hint at emotional detachment in a threatening situation. So I've said what it could suggest, but also may show this. So you can see I've layered my interpretations. I've not just said, oh, this could suggest cruelty, and then just stop there. I've layered it in and said, oh, it could also hint at emotional detachment, layering in my tentative language. Tentative language is the one for this, and then of course pair that with your evaluative words, saying like, it may also show this because the writer successfully or because the writer clearly So we go to question 4. And then lastly, creative writing, the big boy question. Now, I would actually recommend you start with this question. Controversial, shoot me. You want to start with question 5 because this is worth 50% of the whole paper. So I never get when people are like, oh, let me do that last, and I run out of time. A lot of you struggle with timings for English language, and rightly so, because it is a bit trickier. So why would you not start with something that is worth the most amount of marks? And some examiners will say, or teachers will say, students get inspiration from reading the extract. Now, I've worked with a lot of students over the years, like almost 50,000 students across the LITER-Pub. And I'm telling you, the majority of you are not going to get that much inspiration from the extract. You're going to read it and just be panicking and trying to get things done. So start with this question, start with this, then read the extract, then do question 4, 3, 2, 1. And I promise you, you'll just feel so much better about getting the big thing done. Because also you've got the most brain power for this question at the beginning, right? It's like when you wake up, just get the big task done. Get the first thing done that requires the most energy, because as you go on, you're going to get tired because you're in there for a long time. So this question will be write a description or story. So the time for this is about 45 minutes, about 55 minutes if you've got extra time. I would say write for 40, plan for 5. And the reason I say plan for 5 is you would have already pre-written up your creative writing. Again, I know people are like, oh, what? You can pre-write your whole creative writing before you even get into the exam, then all you've got to do is adapt it in the exam. That is it. There is nothing in the mark scheme that states you've got to write exactly what the photo is talking about or the descriptive prompt's got to be. You can pre-write it out and then just adapt it. So a lot of you will be like, hey, should I write a description or should I write a story? Which one should I do? So just so we know the difference, a description will typically be really focused on the five senses. So what you see, smell, touch, taste, hear. It's talking about one moment. It doesn't have a plot. So you're not doing anything in it. You might be sitting in a forest, but you're not going through and trying to find, a guard or a missing knife. Like nothing's going on. You're just describing the forest. Whereas with a story, you'll have a character, there'll be a plot, there'll be a problem. There is a plot to it. So, you'll be in the forest, for example, but then you find a knife, and then that leads you to find a pathway. And on the pathway, there's speckles of blood, and then someone jumps up behind you. That would be a plot, whereas a description is just focusing on what's going on at that point. Now, generally across the board, I would say it's easier to write a description. But a story, if done well, could tend to, or depending on story, probably would award slightly high marks if it's done really well. I personally would recommend for most of you to write a description unless you love storytelling and being really creative, because a description allows you just to stay in one moment and still really focus on the detail. Whereas a lot of students who aren't, really naturally amazing at writing stories will get too focused on what's going on in the plot and they'll forget to describe, because you've still got to do a bit of description in the story, whereas in a description you just do a description. That's why it's slightly easier. But again, you can absolutely choose a story, get full marks. You can get full marks in a description. It doesn't matter. It's completely your preference. Now, top techniques to use for this. So the first one is a controlled structure. Now, if you do go for a story, you want to have a controlled structure, like a beginning, a build-up, a climax, and an end. You want to follow that, and it should be very clear in your language, in your sentence structures, your paragraph lengths, how long and short they are when you're building up this tension, building up this climax. That should be really clear from the language you use and the way it looks on the page. Then we want to have sentence variety. So we want to have long and short for rhythm and impact. So we want to make sure when I look at your piece of creative writing, or when you look at your piece of creative writing once you finished it, you don't want to just have big paragraphs, big blocky paragraphs. You want to have one word sentences or one word paragraphs, or shorter paragraphs than longer paragraphs. Think about shorter paragraphs tend to build more tension. So if you want to build something being tense or intense, make them shorter. And then longer ones give more detailed information. It might be building up to something, whereas the tension comes with shorter paragraphs or shorter sentences. Then we want to have purposeful vocabulary. So what I mean by purposeful vocabulary, it's impressive, but it's natural. So you're not just putting in words to put them in. You're not just putting in similes and metaphors to put them in. It makes sense and it adds to what you're talking about. So, for example, when we were saying earlier, a really basic idea of a simile is as fast as lightning. You wouldn't just put that in if you were just talking about anything like, oh, he walked as fast as lightning. That doesn't really add as much. But maybe he was sprinting and then he fell over, he got back up again, fumbling around, trembling over his feet as fast as lightning, he tried to escape. That adds more to it and it kind of fits in really nicely. But you don't just put it in for no reason just to kind of tick it off. We want to make sure it's done purposely for effect that really adds to tension. Because think about when you're watching a film or you're reading a book, it's all in there to make you feel more tense. It's put in these precise moments. Think about question 3. Why then? Why now? Why has it been put then? To really add something. So if you are doing a story in the climax, make it more purposeful. Make the paragraph length shorter. Make the vocabulary maybe shorter or more punchy to build that tension. And then the main mistake is writing an unfocused or overly long piece with no clear direction. That's probably the number one mistake in creative writing. It's just unfocused. It's really long. There isn't much going on specifically. You're just trying to get loads of things down because you know it's 40 marks. And I know some of you are like, yep, yeah, that's me. I just write loads down in the hope that something will get me marks. So what we want to do, looking at a low level example, is he woke up, he went to the shop, he bought milk, he walked home, it rained. Oh, boring as hell. No, get rid of it. Let's not do that. The low level description would be there was a tree and another tree. The tree was green, it was quiet, it was peaceful. So you can see with the story, obviously events are happening, but it's just no clear direction. it's unfocused, it isn't building up any tension. And with the description, again, it's just telling me what's going around. It's like say what you see. We're not on catchphrase, it's not say what you see, give me a description. So the top tip for this is to focus on one key moment or emotion, then plan a simple structure and use detailed imagery or strong emotion to create an atmosphere. So, for example, a high level example in a story is the bottle slipped from his hand and shattered. A single sharp sound in the silence she left behind. So you can see here, this is creating tension. You can see I've got that dash, like shattered, and it creates a pause, a single sharp sound. I'm describing it, but it's going to be adding to my story. Now with the description, the fog curled around the lamppost like a cat, soft and watchful, dimming the world in grey. So you can see that it's added with purpose. The fact that I've said like around the lamppost like a cat, it gives an image in my head. Like if you probably thought about that, you could imagine a cat being wrapped around a lamppost. So it shows that it's giving an image in the reader's mind, so it's done for effect. And then you can see they're soft and watchful. So I'm not just describing the fog, I'm saying it's soft and watchful to create a really vivid image, like a really clear picture it in my mind, dimming the world into grey. I'm talking about colours as well. So you can see that what I'm doing is really detailed imagery. I could have said the fog was around the lamppost, but I've given a simile. I've described what the fog is. I've described the colour of the fog, and I've given a really good insight into what it is, what I'm describing. Now here are some final reminders. So I want you to zoom in on keywords in question 2. I want you to zoom in on specific keywords. I remember talking about the effect of them. Don't just technique spot, give me the effect. I want you to stay focused on the extract in question 4, making sure you're really focused on the statement and responding to the statement, giving me those evaluative language. Is it successful? Is it unsuccessful? Mostly agree with the statement, but you can partly disagree. Plan briefly for question 5. Even 2 minutes can help. If you're pre-writing out your creative writing, which I highly recommend you to do, in those 2 minutes, what I want you to do is just think about how you're linking it back to the photo or the descriptive prompt that you're given, because that's the only thing you can't pre-plan for question 5 is obviously what the question actually is. So all I want you to do is to write your kind of bullet point out how you're going to link your pre-made description to question 5. Spag matters. Don't throw away 16 marks in question 5. Easiest way to do it is just make sure you have varied paragraph length, varied sentence length, and obviously doing it for like tension. When it's really tense, do it short. When it's you're building up a description, do it a bit longer. And then quality over quantity in every question. I don't want you to write just loads of waffle, especially for question 5, just to get stuff down. Think about everything you do. Try and make it make sense and make a purpose. If you're putting a simile in, try to think, okay, does that create like an image in my reader's mind or allow my reader to understand something a bit better? If I put a short sentence here, is it because I'm building tension, or should I maybe leave that to a bit later and add that because it will make more of a tense atmosphere when I'm talking about it? So that's all you've got to think through, guys. I say all. It's not a lot, but if you do want more help with structures, model examples, this in more depth, we have it on the Light Up Hub already done for you. All you've got to do is log in and we show you how to write your creative writing, how to adapt to any question, so you're completely sorted for English.